What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We've got Andy Ruiz Jr., 33-2, taking on Chris Arreola, 38-6, with 1 draw and 2 no contests. This fight's taking place on May 1st at the Dignity Health Sports Park. That used to be the StubHub Center. It used to be a lot of other things too, but that's in Carson, California. Carson. Now, when they announced this heavyweight fight, I was like, alright. I mean, this is a comeback fight for a former champ now, Andy Ruiz Jr., who had pulled off the major upset against Anthony Joshua, collecting those 3 belts, and then losing it in the rematch where an already perpetually overweight heavyweight came in even heavier in that rematch versus Joshua. He basically lost everything that he had gained in that first win versus AJ. So this is Andy Ruiz's first fight back, and that second fight against AJ, that was all the way back in December of 2019, so it's been a while. And for that reason, I wasn't too mad at this matchup with former 3-time title contender Chris Arreola, who's now 40 years old. I wasn't too mad about it, but when they announced that this was going to be a pay-per-view, I'm just like, huh? Like, fight quality-wise, I mean, you could argue because you've got a former heavyweight champ fighting anybody that's pay-per-view worthy. But I think we understand that, at least to this point, Andy Ruiz, it's not like he's Evander Holyfield or Lennox Lewis or one of these just, staples of a name that just belongs on the A side of a marquee of any fight. So let's not act like all heavyweight champs should be treated equal in that pay-per-view regard. I mean, Andy Ruiz never even defended his heavyweight title successfully. But when you then put on this is a clash of 2 Mexican heavyweights, which fights of this magnitude with Mexican heavyweights is rare, if ever. So if you want to, kind of mark it as that type of an attraction, therefore pay-per-view worthy, okay, it's like, I've seen Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. on pay-per-views before that I didn't think were pay-per-view worthy. So if you want to put that sort of a spin on it, okay, then I get it in that regard. But on its face, this is not a fight with a current elite versus current elite. This is a potentially still current elite in Andy Ruiz. I mean, he's now training with the Reynosos, with Canelo's crew. We see him losing weight and looking pretty impressive. We'll see how it all works when the rubber hits the road, but Andy Ruiz is a high quality fighter. But the guy that he's facing in this regard has been a fan favorite for a long time and a very exciting fighter in Chris Arreola. It's just that, I mean, the guy's 40 years old now. And he has won only 2 of his last 6 fights, officially at least. I mean, this is about as I've been about a major, at least a fight that's being billed as a major fight, as maybe just off the top of my head, Daniel Jacobs versus Gabe Rosado, given where Gabe Rosado appears to be in his career. Now, that fight, even as unenthused as I was about it, delivered even less. It's one of the worst major fights of 2020 that I can recall. But so hopefully this one is at least more exciting than that one. But this isn't even a knock to Chris Arreola. Like, I remember pulling for him against Vitaly Klitschko when he was challenging for the heavyweight title for the first time. Because at that point of Areola's career, he was 27-0. He had wins over Jamil McCline, Chaz Witherspoon, and this was 2008. And so, yes, that is the same Chaz Witherspoon who Alexander Usyk made his heavyweight debut against after dominating at cruiserweight. And he had fought Chaz Witherspoon within the past couple years. So Witherspoon was way over the hill at that point. So that Vitaly Klitschko versus Chris Arreola championship fight was Areola's first loss, and I remember how bent he was that they stopped the fight because he was taking a beating. I mean, Vitaly Klitschko is about as great a heavyweight as I can recall seeing in the past 20 to 30 years. He's definitely on the very, very short list. I'm actually going to make a video comparing Klitschko's, but yeah, Vitaly Klitschko was a badass. He was really putting it on Chris Arreola, but Arreola was so tough. His chin is super resilient. He hits hard. I mean, he was winning most of his fights by knockout, even if he was coming into the ring overweight, and then kind of joking about it in the post-win in-ring interview where he would basically be talking about what he's eating. He would cuss a lot in his post-fight interviews. Very entertaining dude, but I remember how devastated Arreola was when he officially lost to Vitaly Klitschko, because he was hanging in there. He was taking a beating, and they let it go until the 10th, which might have been longer than they should have, but they eventually stopped that fight. Arreola's first loss. And then since then, he had lost 2 fights later via close majority decision against Thomas Ademic, and then Arreola won his next 7 or 8 fights, and then he loses to Bermane Stiverne in a very, very close and competitive 12-rounder. Stiverne was awarded the decision, and then they fight a couple fights later, and between this point, Arreola also fought Seth Mitchell, who was a football player turned boxer. It didn't go well for Seth Mitchell, who had, to his credit, split versus Jonathan Banks from Crunk Gym, the guy who's kind of taken over the reins from the late Emmanuel Stewart. Sugar Hill trains a lot of those fighters as well, but we've seen Jonathan Banks, for instance, coaching Vladimir Klitschko in Klitschko's final fights. But Banks, an experienced fighter, split with the football player turned fighter Seth Mitchell. Well, that same Seth Mitchell fought Chris Arreola after Arreola lost to Bermane Stiverne via decision, and then Arreola just destroys Seth Mitchell, first round knockout. And then he has a rematch versus Bermane Stiverne. And keep in mind, this is a completely different Bermane Stiverne than you've seen in recent years. Like when he just got mocked versus Deontay Wilder. You know, he had fought Wilder the first time, which is actually how Wilder earned the WBC belt. The same WBC belt that was vacant and for the taking in this second Bermane Stiverne versus Chris Arreola fight. So this was Chris Arreola's second crack at the title. This time, Bermane Stiverne finishes Arreola, knocks him out in the 6th round. And this was in 2014. So this was still 7 years ago. But it kind of feels like it's been like a gradual descent for Arreola since that second loss to Bermane Stiverne, the stoppage for the vacant WBC belt. But 4 fights later, Arreola finds himself in another title fight, but this time versus Deontay Wilder, who has since won it versus Bermane Stiverne in that decision win. So Deontay Wilder defends his WBC belt against Chris Arreola in 2016, and Wilder pretty much more or less dominates the fight. And it's weird. It's almost like Deontay Wilder was a better round winner during these 2015, 2016, 17 years than he's appeared to be in the most recent of years. But, I mean, even though he had struggled against Gerald Washington, he struggled obviously against Luis Ortiz, and then even more obviously against Tyson Fury. But Wilder, it seems, is not as good a round winner in these recent years as he was when he was beating up on Chris Arreola and winning the rounds and eventually stopping him in the 8th round. So that was Chris Arreola's 3rd crack at the title. Now, when I look at somebody as skilled and fast-handed as Andy Ruiz and then match him up with Chris Arreola, I'm inclined to say landslide victory for Andy Ruiz, probably by stoppage, and maybe not competitive. The one thing that makes me pause about that, besides just the question marks about Ruiz's performance given his last preparation for the Joshua rematch, is that in Chris Arreola's most recent fight, this is in August of 2019, which is another red flag, right? You got a 40-year-old who hasn't fought in over a year and a half now. But that August 2019 fight between Chris Arreola and Adam Kownacki, who at the time was one of the surging prospects in heavyweight, still kind of is, but he had a devastating setback loss, his first loss of his career, versus Robert Helenius, kind of a win-some, lose-some guy himself, super tall though, like 6'7", 6'8", or something. But Adam Kownacki, by this point, was kind of cracking into the top 10, and he was, with PBC, so he was kind of in line to get the maybe a Deontay Wilder opportunity at some point, probably 1-2 significant wins away. And he has a fight with Chris Arreola, and he was supposed to just kind of blow Arreola away, but it ended up being way more of a slugfest, way more of a Chris Arreola type of fight than you would have hoped for somebody who is supposed to be as renowned and just kind of seen as a surging potential elite, especially given, Chris Arreola's age and, just the different things you have working against you at that stage of your career. That was supposed to be, hey, now we're giving Adam Kownacki like a big name to kind of mow over so then he could really establish himself like, yeah, this guy's the real deal. Well, Adam Kownacki won the fight, and he won it pretty convincingly. It wasn't like a, 7 rounds to 5 type of fight, 115 to 113. It wasn't that. But Kownacki got hit a lot more than he should have. And that was kind of a red flag for me that made me think, oh, at some point, not necessarily in that next fight against Helenius, where Helenius upset Kownacki with a knockout, but that, getting hit that often wasn't going to bode well, at some point in the near future. And it just happened to be the very next fight against Helenius where Kownacki really paid for it. So the fact that Arreola lulled Kownacki into a slugfest before that Helenius fight says one of two things. Either Arreola isn't totally done and still has something left in the tank even against very good fighters, or Adam Kownacki isn't as good as we thought he might be. He's a Polish-American Brooklynite, so, there was a lot of potential for star power there, and still is, but we'll have to see if he could get that back on track. Right now, we've got Andy Ruiz Jr. against Arreola, and again, I think that Andy Ruiz should get hit a lot less than Kownacki got hit against Arreola, and should get him out of there within the 12-round distance. What I'm looking for is how convincingly can Andy Ruiz beat Arreola in pretty much every round up until the point that he gets the stoppage. Like, I really think he should dominate this fight. It shouldn't be that competitive. Again, Andy Ruiz, skills and tools-wise, he's a much better boxer than even Chris Arreola was in his prime. Like, in terms of the X's and O's, the sweet science, if you will, the hit and not get hit. Even though, again, Arreola, we saw him compete relatively competitively against the great Vitaly Klitschko. Andy Ruiz has much faster hands than Arreola, is better defensively than Arreola, and is just overall a more complete package than Arreola. Now, that upset victory for the championships against Anthony Joshua, where Ruiz got dropped in the 3rd round, recovered, dropped AJ down twice in that same round, and then eventually stops him like in the 7th or 8th. I think it was the 7th where he knocks him down 2 more times and then the ref calls it off. 4 knockdowns on AJ. That wasn't Andy Ruiz's first crack of the title. He himself was fighting for a vacant WBO, which I've always looked at as like kind of the lesser of the 4 major titles. Often at times you looked at the history of the different belt holders and the different sanctioning bodies, WBC, WBA, and so forth. You'll notice that the WBO champ is often the guy where it's like, who the hell is that? Just more so than in the WBC. Usually you should know who the WBC or the WBA, those are kind of the top 2 belt holders are. But nonetheless, there are sometimes exceptions. For instance, Terrence Crawford is currently the WBO belt holder at 147. So Andy Ruiz had a shot at the heavyweight title before. It came against Joseph Parker, and Joseph Parker won a close majority decision win versus Ruiz. Ruiz thought he won that fight. It was a very close one, but they gave it to Parker. That's how he became a belt holder and then lost that belt via decision to Anthony Joshua. But that's Andy Ruiz's only other loss other than the second, fight against Anthony Joshua. So he's some serious business. He's beaten Dimitrenko, who's not a bad fighter, not a great fighter, but he's a pretty serviceable fighter. And several years before that, now we're talking like 2014, 2015, he beat Liakovic, who himself was a pretty respected fighter. He beat Joe Hanks back in 2013. So, you know, Andy Ruiz has been pretty much putting hands on just about everybody he's fighting, except for in that, you know, second fight with Anthony Joshua, where it was just super disappointing how underprepared he appeared in that fight. And, you know, this next run, now under the tutelage, again, of the Reynosos and Canelo's whole team, and, you know, this is a bit of a redemptive opportunity for Andy Ruiz to make good on all the potential that people have been seeing. Now, most people didn't know how good he was, even leading up to that first fight with AJ. He was a replacement fighter for Jarrell Big Baby Miller. And so when he was chosen as a replacement, a lot of the, you know, the casual fans and even some of the boxing heads were looking at Andy Ruiz like, who? Well, you know, the joke was on them. It turned out the kid really had skills, and only the, you know, the real hardcore boxing fans were aware of that going into the AJ fight. No, we didn't think that he was going to beat AJ, but we didn't think it was a foregone conclusion that AJ was just going to run over him either. We thought, okay, probably AJ, but this is another serious opponent for AJ. But at that point, we had seen AJ beaten Povetkin, Joseph Parker, Dillian White, Vladimir Klitschko. So, you know, it would be one of several good fighters that AJ had beaten. It just so turned out Andy Ruiz pulled out the knockout upset. So, he should have his way with Arreola here. I would really be concerned about his prospects going forward if this does turn out to be a slugfest. If this turns out to be a very competitive fight where, you know, I don't know, you're heading into the scorecards and it's like, I don't know if he got that one. Look, I don't expect either of those things to happen here. He should do all the things that we are accustomed to see him do. He changes levels coming in. He moves his head a little bit. He doesn't have super fast feet, but he's able to kind of navigate the ring well enough to patiently stalk and hunt the opponent. Dip, dip, stay elusive, stay out of range. And then when he chooses to, boom, 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 let his hands go with like a mean 4 or 5 punch combination. And that's what he does. Great combination puncher. And I don't see any way that Arreola should be able to catch up with that. I don't think he's a quick enough counter puncher to just, boom, make Andy Ruiz pay for invading the pocket. I don't see Arreola having that type of skill set. Arreola can hit you if you stand around in the pocket and just start trading with him. That's when he'll get to you. But I don't see him able to effectively jab with Andy Ruiz, and I don't see him being quick enough to keep pace with Ruiz's hand speed in the exchanges that do occur. I see Arreola getting hit early, hard, and often until they call the fight. But yeah, let me know what you think about this one. I'm more curious as to, you know, given a win, I'm assuming that Ruiz wins this one, but where does he go from there? He's currently with, you know, PBC, so does he fight Deontay Wilder after that? Does he have a rematch with Joseph Parker, even though Joseph Parker's with DAZN? Does he fight Dillian White, even though Dillian White's with Matchroom and DAZN? I just want to see Ruiz get another crack at one of these top heavyweights. One of them I want to see, and I don't know if it's still doable because Luis Ortiz is getting so old, but I would love to see Andy Ruiz versus Luis Ortiz. Who wouldn't? Or, damn, I mean, Andy Ruiz versus Michael Hunter would be cool. Andy Ruiz versus Alexander Usyk would be fun. But yeah, we'll see how all of that shakes out. A lot of this is just predicated on if and when they get the mega fight between Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua. Hopefully all belts on the line. Hopefully none of the sanctioning bodies do any funny business where it's like, oh, if you don't fight Alexander Usyk, we're going to take the title away from you. I hope none of that happens. I really hope that they are able to unify the heavyweight belt, and I hope that the fight gets made. And then we could kind of assess where, you know, fighters 3 through 10, 11, how that all unfolds. But yeah, let me know what you think about Andy Ruiz versus Chris Arreola. Please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.